Have you ever been threatened with termination right in the middle of a crowded conference room, simply because you refused to just nod along? I looked straight at the vice president and delivered exactly one sentence that silenced the entire table. He had no idea that the moment he smirked, I already had enough documentation to turn his threat into an undeniable HR case. The first person to lose their title that day was not me. My name is Madeline Walsh, and I knew the exact dollar value of the silence that filled Conference Room B. It was the kind of heavy, expensive silence that usually precedes a disaster, the sort that costs a company millions in lawsuits or lost data. But this morning, the impending disaster was not technical, it was personal. I stood at the head of the long mahogany table, my hand resting lightly on the clicker. On the screen behind me, a projection of the risk assessment matrix for the summit migration glowed in stark reds and oranges. I had spent the last 48 hours compiling this data. It was clean. It was logical. It was undeniable. I was 33 years old, and I had spent the last decade building a reputation in Denver as the person who did not let projects fail. I did not rely on charm. I relied on facts. As you can see on slide 4, I said, keeping my voice level, the current server latency is tracking at 15% above the acceptable threshold. If we push to deploy by Friday, we are looking at a critical failure rate of nearly 20%. The engineering team needs 2 more weeks to stabilize the load balancers. I looked around the room. Most of the project managers were nodding, their eyes glued to the data. They knew I was right. They were the ones who would be waking up at 3 a.m. when the system crashed. But Graham Kessler was not looking at the screen. Our senior vice president of operations sat at the far end of the table, leaning back in his ergonomic chair with the practiced ease of a man who believes he owns the building. He was wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my first car, and he was tapping a gold pen against the table. Tap, 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 Madeline. Graham interrupted. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. When the SVP speaks, the room stops. I paused. Yes. Graham. You are doing it again, he said, letting out a long, weary sigh that sounded theatrically exhausted. He looked around the table, inviting the others to share in his frustration. We are trying to build excitement for this launch. We are trying to rally the troops. And here you are, throwing numbers at us that frankly feel like excuses. You are demoralizing the team. I felt the temperature in the room drop. I am not offering excuses, Graham. I am offering a risk analysis. That is my job. Your job, he said, his eyes narrowing just enough to sharpen the edge in his voice, is to facilitate operations, not to block them. You are making a mountain out of a molehill. This is standard deployment friction. You are being hysterical about technicalities. The word hung in the air. Hysterical. It was a loaded word, a weaponized word used specifically to dismantle the credibility of women in corporate spaces. I felt a flush of heat rise up my neck, but I forced my face to remain a mask of professional neutrality. The data indicates a 20% failure rate. I repeated, my voice stripping away any emotion. That is not a technicality. That is a liability. Graham stopped tapping his pen. He sat up straight, planting his elbows on the table. He looked directly at me, his expression shifting from dismissal to open hostility. Let me be clear. Madeline, he said. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the air conditioning unit. I need team players on this launch. I do not need roadblocks. If you continue to obstruct the timeline with this negativity, I will be forced to reconsider your position at Northbridge. The silence that followed was absolute. People stared at their notebooks. Someone coughed nervously. He had just threatened my livelihood in front of 12 witnesses. It was a power move designed to crush me, to force me to apologize and retreat. He expected me to stutter. He expected me to back down. I did neither. I looked him dead in the eye. I did not blink. I did not frown. Do you want me to record that specific statement in the official meeting minutes? Graham, I asked. My tone was polite, helpful even. It was the tone of a diligent employee clarifying an instruction, but the subtext was lethal. I was telling him that I heard him, that I was not afraid, and that I was prepared to create a permanent record of his threat. Graham froze. For a split second, I saw a flicker of uncertainty behind his polished veneer. He realized he had overstepped, and worse, he realized I was not playing by the unwritten rule of submission. "That won't be necessary," he muttered, waving his hand dismissively as he stood up. "Let's take 5. Everyone." Meeting adjourned. The room cleared out faster than I had ever seen. People practically ran for the door to avoid the fallout. I disconnected my laptop, my hands steady. I felt a strange sense of calm. The line had been crossed. I walked out of the conference room and into the glass-walled corridor that overlooked the Denver skyline. The mountains were visible in the distance, covered in snow. Indifferent to the petty wars of the corporate world, I just wanted to get back to my desk and breathe. "Madeline." I stopped. Graham was waiting for me near the break room. He had positioned himself so that we were visible to the office floor, but out of earshot of the cubicles. He stepped into my personal space, just close enough to be intimidating, but far enough away to claim he was just having a friendly chat. "Look," he said, his voice dropping to that confidential, fake brotherly register he used when he wanted to manipulate someone. "I didn't mean to be harsh back there, but you have to understand the pressure I'm under from the board. We need this win." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was a shark's smile. "I am just trying to help you. Madeline," he continued, "you are talented, but you can be difficult. Don't make this hard for me. Don't force my hand. Just get on board. Okay, I understand your position." "Graham," I said. I gave him nothing. No apology, no agreement. "Good," he said, patting the air near my shoulder. A gesture of dominance disguised as reassurance. "I knew you'd see reason." He walked away, heading toward the executive wing. I watched him go, noting the arrogance in his stride. He thought he had fixed it. He thought a little bit of fear mixed with a little bit of fake camaraderie would put me back in my box. I walked back to my desk in the open plan office. My workspace was neat, organized, and nondescript. I sat down and unlocked my computer. I did not open my email immediately. Instead, I navigated to a folder hidden 3 layers deep in my personal drive. The folder was named simply "If He Pushes." I had created it 6 months ago. The first time Graham had stolen credit for my work on the alpha phase. I had hoped I would never have to use it. I had hoped that if I just worked hard enough, if I was just competent enough, the politics wouldn't matter. But hope is not a strategy. I opened the folder. Inside were subfolders organized by date. There was a spreadsheet detailing every instance where he had undermined a female colleague. There were saved emails where he contradicted himself. There was a timeline of the Summit migration project, highlighting every decision he made that caused the delays he was now blaming on me. And there was one PDF file that I had downloaded from the company intranet 2 weeks ago, the internal whistleblower and retaliation reporting form. I opened a blank document and began to type. Incident date Monday, October 23rd. Time 9:15 in the morning. Location conference room B. Witnesses 12 attendees present. Statement SVP. Graham Kessler explicitly threatened my employment status in response to a factual risk assessment report. I typed out the quote exactly as he had said it. "I will be forced to reconsider your position." I was not just documenting a bad boss. I was building a fortress. I saved the document and backed it up to a private cloud storage account I accessed via my phone. They could lock me out of the system, but they could not delete what I already had. A notification pinged on my screen, breaking my concentration. I looked at the bottom right corner of my monitor. A calendar invitation had just landed in my inbox. My stomach gave a small, cold lurch. Subject urgent. One-on-one location, HR conference room, a time. 10 o'clock this morning, I stared at the screen. A meeting with HR, scheduled less than 45 minutes after the incident. Usually, HR takes days to move. This was fast. Too fast. Then I looked at the organizer of the meeting. It was not Kara Sutherland, the HR business partner. It wasn't any of the HR coordinators. The meeting had been booked by Elena Rosales, Graham's executive assistant. He wasn't waiting for me to fall in line. He wasn't waiting to see if his hallway intimidation worked. He was moving to strike first. He was going to paint the narrative before I even had a chance to open my mouth. He was dragging me to HR not to mediate, but to execute the threat he had made 45 minutes ago. I looked at the clock. It was 9:50 in the morning. I had 10 minutes. I closed the If He Pushes folder, but I didn't close the browser window with the company policy on retaliation. I printed it, I stood up, smoothed out my blazer, and grabbed my notebook. I was walking into an ambush, I knew that. But Graham Kessler had made one critical mistake. He thought he was calling a meeting to discipline a subordinate. He didn't realize he was inviting the only person in the building who had kept receipts for everything. I headed toward the elevators. The game had officially started. To understand why I was standing in front of the elevator with my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, you have to understand the 3 years that led up to this moment. I did not walk into Northbridge DataWorks with a target on my back. I walked in with a crisp blazer, a freshly printed certification in agile management, and the naive belief that competence was the only currency that mattered. I started as a technical project manager, the person hired to bridge the gap between the developers who spoke in code and the executives who spoke in profit margins. It was the role nobody wanted. It was the role where you were responsible for everything but had authority over nothing. I took the assignments that other managers dodged. When the legacy database needed a complete overhaul, I was the one who volunteered to map the architecture. When the client in London needed a conference call at 3 a.m. Denver time, I was the one setting the alarm. For the first 2 years, I thought I was building equity. I thought I was proving my worth. But looking back, I was just teaching them that I was a renewable resource they could burn without cost. The erasure of my identity happened slowly, like a shoreline eroding inch by inch. I remember the first time I noticed it. I had spent 6 weeks salvaging a disastrous API integration for a healthcare client. I had mediated arguments between the back-end engineers and the client's IT security team. I had rewritten the documentation myself over a weekend because the technical writer was out sick. When the project launched successfully, Graham Kessler sent out a company-wide email. Great win for the operations team. He had written, "This was a solid team effort that shows our commitment to excellence." My name was nowhere in the text. There was no mention of the late nights or the specific solutions I had engineered. It was just a team effort. However, 2 weeks later, when a minor scheduling error caused a delay in a different module, Graham's email was very different. "We are experiencing delays due to an oversight by Madeline's department." The email read, that was the pattern. Success was communal property, harvested by leadership to boost their bonuses. Failure was an orphan that was dropped specifically on my doorstep. I became the designated absorber of blame. The breaking point should have been the Summit migration. This was the project that Graham was currently using to threaten my job. It was a massive undertaking, moving our entire core data structure to a new cloud environment. It was the kind of project that makes or breaks a fiscal year. For 3 months, I lived and breathed that migration. I became the translator for 3 different departments. I soothed the anxieties of the account managers and reined in the ambitions of the developers. There were nights when I did not go home. I would push 2 office chairs together in the quiet corner of the server room, the hum of the cooling fans acting as white noise, and sleep for 3 hours with my laptop glowing on the floor next to me. I missed my sister's engagement dinner because a critical patch failed deployment, and I had to coordinate the rollback. I told myself it was worth it. I told myself that when we hit the 90% milestone, the recognition would come. I was wrong. Last month, during the quarterly all-hands meeting, Graham stood on the stage. He looked tan and rested. He projected a slide showing the Summit migration's success metrics that I had compiled. Charts that I had designed. "I am proud to say that I have steered this ship through choppy waters," Graham announced, beaming at the applause. "It takes strong leadership to manage a transition this complex." He did not look at me once. I sat in the 3rd row, clapping until my hands stung, feeling a cold, heavy stone settle in my stomach. That was the moment the illusion shattered. I realized I wasn't an employee with a future. I was just the engine in Graham's car. He didn't care about the engine. He only cared that the car looked good when he pulled up to the valet. It was Maya Linton who finally said the quiet part out loud. Maya was the quality assurance lead, a woman with sharp eyes and zero patience for corporate doublespeak. We were grabbing lunch at a salad place a block away from the office, trying to escape the suffocating air of the building. You know he's going to clip you. Right? Maya asked, stabbing a fork into her kale. I looked up, startled. What do you mean, Graham? She said, her voice low. He does this every 2 years or so. When a project gets too big, or when the budget numbers start looking a little shaky, he picks someone. He finds a person who is doing the actual work, and he starts chipping away at them. He needs a villain. Madeline. I shook my head, not wanting to believe it. That doesn't make sense. I am the only one who knows how the migration actually works. If he fires me, the project stalls. Maya gave me a look of pity mixed with frustration. It is not about the project working. It is about the narrative. The internal audit is coming up next month. Rumor has it that operations is over budget by nearly $500,000. Graham cannot admit he mismanaged the funds. He needs a scapegoat. He needs to say that the delays and the costs are because of an inefficient project manager who refused to follow his guidance. I sat there, the food turning to ash in my mouth. He is setting me up. He is painting a picture. Maya corrected. He is making you look difficult. He is calling you rigid. He is telling people you are overwhelmed. By the time he fires you, everyone will think he is doing the team a favor. I thought about that conversation as I stood by the elevator, waiting to go up to the HR suite. Maya had been right. The pieces fit together with terrifying precision. The meeting this morning wasn't just a bad mood. It wasn't Graham losing his temper because of stress. It was a calculated performance. He knew exactly what he was doing when he threatened me in front of the room. He wanted me to snap. He wanted me to scream or cry or storm out. If I had done any of those things, he would have had grounds for insubordination right there. He could have walked straight to HR and said I was unstable, but I hadn't snapped. I had asked for the minutes to be recorded. I had threatened his narrative with a paper trail. And that was why the HR meeting request had come so fast. He realized his first trap had failed, so he was accelerating the timeline. He wasn't waiting for the audit anymore. He was moving to neutralize the threat I posed. I thought about the "if he pushes" folder on my computer. I thought about the dates I had logged. I realized that my diligence wasn't just about being a good employee anymore. It was about survival. Graham didn't want a project manager. He wanted a human shield. The elevator doors chimed and slid open. The interior was mirrored, reflecting my own face back at me. I looked tired. Yes, but I also looked sharp. The fear that had gripped me earlier was starting to crystallize into something colder, something harder. I wasn't going up there to defend my performance. My performance was impeccable, and I had the data to prove it. I was going up there to defend my reality against a man who had spent his entire career rewriting the truth to suit his ambition. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the 12th floor. The doors closed, sealing me in. I took a deep breath, smoothing the front of my blazer. I remembered the feeling of sleeping on the floor of the server room, the exhaustion deep in my bones. I had given this company everything. Graham Kessler was not going to take it away from me just because he needed to balance his ledger. The numbers on the display ticked upward. 10, 11, 12. The doors opened. The HR reception area was quiet, carpeted in muted gray. I stepped out, my notebook clutched in my hand like a shield. I was walking into the lion's den, but the lion didn't know I had brought a weapon. The realization hit me with total clarity. This wasn't about saving my job anymore. This was about making sure that when the story was told, the villain had the right name. I returned to my desk with a singular, cold purpose. The meeting with HR had been exactly what I expected: a vague, patronizing conversation about communication styles and finding alignment, designed to put me on notice without technically disciplining me. They wanted me to feel unstable. They wanted me to question my own reality. Instead, I turned off the part of my brain that processed fear and anger. I engaged the part of my brain that processed logic. I became a machine. I opened my email client and began drafting the recap of the morning's disaster. In the corporate world, if it is not written down, it did not happen. I typed with a steady, rhythmic cadence. Subject recap of project status meeting. Risk assessment review. I carefully selected the recipients. I included Graham, obviously, but I also carbon copied the entire project management team, the lead engineers, and crucially, the VP of engineering, a man named Marcus who rarely checked his email, but whose name on the CC line would make Graham nervous. "Hi, team," I wrote, "to ensure we are all aligned following this morning's discussion. I want to summarize the key action items and risks identified regarding the summit migration. I did not mention the threat. Not yet. That was for the HR case file. This email was about proving competence. Point 1. Current server latency is tracking 15% above the threshold, posing a significant risk to the launch window. Point 2. As discussed, I recommended a 2-week stabilization period to mitigate a potential 20% failure rate. Point 3. Graham Kessler advised that the timeline must remain fixed and instructed the team to proceed despite the presented metrics. I read it over. It was dry. It was factual. It pinned the decision to ignore the data squarely on Graham's chest. I hit send. The response came less than 4 minutes later. My inbox chimed. It was a reply all from Graham. "Madeline." The email began. "Thank you for the notes. While I appreciate your attention to detail, I am concerned that your summary reflects a resistance to problem solving. We need to be focused on solutions, not just listing obstacles. Let's try to maintain a more collaborative attitude moving forward so we do not cause further unnecessary delays to the team's momentum." I stared at the screen. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. He had taken my factual risk assessment and reframed it as a personality defect. He used words like resistance and collaborative to paint me as the difficult woman who refused to get along. He was creating a paper trail of his own, one that framed me as an obstructionist. I did not reply. There was no winning a reply-all war. Instead, I went to check the live data. If he was going to claim I was listing obstacles, I was going to pull the raw logs from the staging environment to prove that the obstacles were mathematical facts, not opinions. I navigated to the internal dashboard we used for real-time monitoring. It was a tool I had helped configure 3 years ago. I clicked on the Admin View tab to drill down into the server load specifics. The screen flashed white, then displayed a gray box with red text. "Access denied. You do not have permission to view this resource." I frowned. That was impossible. I was the project lead. I had admin rights. I refreshed the page. "Access denied." My heart skipped a beat. I tried a different dashboard, the one tracking budget burn rates. Read-only access. I could see the top-line numbers, but I could no longer see the granular data. I couldn't see who authorized the spend or when. They were blinding me. It was subtle enough that they could claim it was a system update or a security audit if I asked about it, but it was targeted enough to cripple my ability to defend myself. Without that data, I could not prove the latency issues were getting worse. I could only offer opinions, and Graham had already made it clear that my opinions were considered hysterical. My phone buzzed on the desk, vibrating against the hard laminate surface. I glanced down. It was a text message, not a corporate Slack message. It was from Derek Voss. Derek was a mid-level manager in the infrastructure team. He was a good man, quiet, the kind of guy who kept his head down and did his work. We had shared coffee in the break room a few times, bonding over the absurdity of executive mandates. "Madeline." The text read, "Watch your back. I just walked past the server room. I heard them talking. They are looking for data to justify a PAP. Do not give them anything. A PAP, a performance improvement plan. In theory, a PAP is a tool to help struggling employees get back on track. In reality, especially at Northbridge, it was a formal notification of termination with a 30-day delay. It was the corporate coffin. Once you were on a PP, they set impossible goals, documented your inevitable failure, and then fired you with cause so they didn't have to pay severance." I texted back, my fingers trembling slightly. "Thanks, Derek. I know. It is worse than that," he replied. "They are asking for retroactive logs. Be careful." I put the phone face down. The air in the office suddenly felt thin. The gentle hum of conversation around me, the clacking of keyboards, the smell of stale coffee, it all felt like a stage set. I was the only one who knew the walls were closing in. I needed to know how far along they were. If they were preparing a PP, they needed a history of poor performance, but my performance reviews had always been stellar. My last review, 6 months ago, had been a 4.8 out of 5. I minimized my work tabs and opened the HR portal. Workday. My hands were cold as I navigated to the performance section. I clicked on my most recent evaluation. There it was. Overall rating exceeds expectations. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. The numbers were safe. But then I scrolled down to the comments section. Usually, the comments were generic praise about my organizational skills. But as I read the text at the bottom of the page, my blood ran cold. There was a new paragraph added to the Areas for Development section. Employee demonstrates a tendency to become rigid under pressure and struggles to align with leadership vision. Several instances of insubordination regarding timeline expectations have been noted. I stared at the words. That paragraph had not been there 6 months ago. I had a PDF copy of the original review saved on my home drive. I knew for a fact those words were new. Furthermore, the writing style was wrong. My direct manager, a woman named Sarah, who was currently on maternity leave, wrote in short, bulleted sentences. This paragraph was verbose, flowery, and vindictive. It sounded exactly like Graham. I looked for the metadata. In most views, the system only showed the final text. But I knew a trick. I clicked on View History, a small link in the corner intended for audit purposes. A pop-up window appeared showing the modification log. Last modified by admin exec assist 04 date. Sunday, October 22nd, time 11:47 at night. I froze. Sunday night. Yesterday, Graham, or someone acting on his orders using an admin account, had logged into the HR system late on a Sunday night, nearly 12 hours before the meeting where he threatened me and altered my past performance review. He had planted the evidence of my insubordination before the insubordination had even happened. This wasn't just a reaction to me speaking up in the meeting. This wasn't just a bad boss having a power trip. This was a premeditated execution. He had planned to fire me all along. The meeting this morning was just theater to trigger the event he had already scripted. I took a screenshot of the log. Then I took a picture of the screen with my phone, just in case they wiped the logs. I looked across the office toward the executive suites. The glass walls were opaque, reflecting the fluorescent lights. Graham was in there somewhere, probably laughing, thinking he was the smartest man in the room. He thought he was playing chess against a pawn. He didn't realize that by editing that file at 11:47 on a Sunday night, he had just handed me the murder weapon. I wasn't fighting for credit anymore. I wasn't fighting for the project. I was fighting a corruption that went straight to the top of the operations department. I closed the window, erased my browser history, and sat back. A cold calm settled over me, heavier and darker than before. If they wanted a villain, I would show them what happens when you try to frame the person who holds the keys to the data. I opened a fresh document. It was time to organize my evidence. The If He Pushes folder was about to get a lot bigger. The transition from employee to investigator is a strange psychological shift. For years, I had viewed my laptop as a tool for creation, a place where I built schedules, managed budgets, and solved problems. Now, as I sat in the sterile white light of the open-plan office, my computer became something else entirely. It was a crime scene, and I was the forensic analyst dusting for fingerprints. I did not storm into Graham's office. I did not call my lawyer. I simply opened a fresh spreadsheet. My goal was not to construct a trap. Traps are messy, and they can be argued away as manipulation. My goal was to curate a museum of Graham's own behavior. I wanted to collect his actions, preserve them in amber, and let them speak for themselves. If he was innocent, the data would exonerate him. If he was guilty, the data would hang him. I started with the performance review. I had the screenshot of the modification log from Sunday night. But a screenshot is just a picture. I needed the context. I went back through my email archives and found the original PDF copy of the review sent to me 6 months ago by my actual manager, Sarah. I saved it as Exhibit A, original review. Then I saved the current, altered version from the HR portal as Exhibit B, altered review. I placed them side by side on my monitor. The difference was glaring. The original was professional, constructive, and written in Sarah's distinct voice, short sentences, heavy on bullet points. The new paragraph was a dense block of corporate jargon, using words like insubordination and visionary alignment. It was like seeing a patch of fresh, wet paint on a weathered wall. It did not belong. Next, I opened Slack. I exported my entire direct message history with Graham going back 2 years. It was surprisingly short. Graham was a man who understood the danger of written words. He rarely typed anything substantive. His messages were mostly, "Come see me" or "Let's discuss offline." However, the gaps in the conversation were evidence in themselves. I cross-referenced his "come see me" messages with my calendar. Every time he summoned me, it was immediately followed by a decision that negatively impacted my team. Yet there was no written record of the instruction. I was building a timeline. Date August 12th. Slack message from Graham. Stop by. Outcome budget for QA tools. Cut by 15%. No email trail. Date September 4th. Slack message from Graham. Chat room. Outcome deadline for migration moved up by 2 weeks against engineering advice. No email trail. It was a pattern of shadow management. He gave orders in the dark so he could deny them in the light. A notification popped up on my screen. It was Maya Linton. Check your personal email. The message read, I picked up my phone and opened my private Gmail account. Maya had sent me a series of screenshots from Jira, our project tracking software. I opened the first image. It was a ticket for a critical security bug, classified as Sev 1, the highest severity level. Look at the audit history. Maya had written in the body of the email. I zoomed in. The ticket had been assigned to the lead security engineer for 3 weeks. Then, at 8 in the morning today, exactly 1 hour before the meeting where Graham threatened me, the ticket's assignee had been changed. It was now assigned to me. I felt a flash of anger hot enough to burn. Project managers do not fix code. We track tickets. We do not resolve them. Assigning a security vulnerability to a project manager is like assigning a heart surgery to the hospital receptionist. It makes no sense, unless the goal is to ensure the ticket remains unresolved so you can blame the assignee for negligence. I texted Maya back. He is padding my queue with technical debt I cannot fix. It gets worse, she replied. He changed the status to blocked by management. This was the smoking gun of sabotage. By marking it blocked by management and assigning it to me, he was creating a digital narrative that I was personally preventing the security team from doing their job. If the system was hacked, my name would be on the ticket that let the hackers in. I saved the images. Exhibit C, sabotage of workflow. I needed to formalize the rules of engagement. I navigated to the company intranet and located the legal and compliance section. I did not just browse. I downloaded. I saved the anti-retaliation policy. I saved the code of conduct. I saved the data integrity standards. I read the definition of hostile work environment carefully. It required a pattern of behavior that was pervasive and severe. Graham knew this. That was why he spread his aggression out a little here, a little there. Never enough in one moment to get fired, but enough over time to break someone. But he had gotten sloppy. The modification of the review was a felony-level mistake in the corporate world. It was fraud. I decided it was time to change the way I played the game. Graham relied on the silence of the hallway. He relied on the quick chat. I was going to take that weapon away from him. Around 2 in the afternoon, Graham walked by my desk. He did not stop, but he slowed down just enough to drop a command. Madeline, cancel the vendor meeting for tomorrow. I need you to focus on the slide deck for the board, he said, not looking at me. his eyes fixed on some distant point down the hall. In the past, I would have just said, "Okay," and done it. Instead, I waited until he turned the corner, then I opened my email. Subject: confirmation of instruction. Vendor meeting cancellation, Graham. Per your verbal instruction given at my desk at 2:15 this afternoon, I am canceling the scheduled meeting with the database vendor for tomorrow. I will redirect my time to the board slide deck as requested. Please note that canceling this meeting will delay the licensing renewal by 3 days, which may incur a late fee of $2,000. I will proceed, unless I hear otherwise. I hit send. 10 minutes later, my desk phone rang. The caller ID showed Kessler. Graham. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. I wanted him to sit in the discomfort. "This is Madeline," I said, my voice bright and professional. "Madeline." Graham's voice was tight, the charm completely gone. "Why are you emailing me about this?" "Just do what I asked. You do not need to clutter my inbox with every little thing. I just want to ensure we are aligned." "Graham," I said, keeping my tone helpful. "With the audit coming up, I want to make sure all decisions regarding budget impacts, like the potential late fee, are documented. I am just looking out for the department." He was silent for a moment. He knew he couldn't argue against documenting for the audit without sounding suspicious. "Fine," he snapped. "Just get the slides done." He hung up. I immediately opened a new email. Subject: recap of phone call. Vendor meeting, Graham. Thank you for clarifying via phone at 2:30 this afternoon. I have noted your confirmation to proceed with canceling the vendor meeting despite the potential late fee. I will prioritize the slide deck as instructed. I hit send. I could almost hear his teeth grinding from across the office. He wanted to operate in the gray areas, where accountability was fluid. I was forcing him into the black and white. Every time he moved, I snapped a picture. Every time he spoke, I wrote it down. I wasn't being rude. I wasn't being insubordinate. I was being aggressively compliant. I was following the corporate rulebook so strictly that it was strangling him. By 4 o'clock, I had sent 5 such emails. One for a request to change a font size, one for a directive to ignore a QA report. Each email was polite, time-stamped, and copied to my personal archive. I watched him from behind my monitor. He was pacing in his glass office, checking his phone, looking agitated. He wasn't used to resistance. He was used to people folding. He was used to people fearing his title so much that they absorbed his bad decisions just to keep the peace. But I wasn't keeping the peace anymore. I was keeping the score. I looked at my folder of evidence, the modified review, the sabotaged JIRA tickets, the timeline of verbal commands versus written records. I realized then that I wasn't just building a defense, I was building a mirror. Graham Kessler believed he was a powerful executive who made hard choices. My documentation was showing the truth he was a liability, who manipulated data and people to cover his own incompetence. I wasn't going to destroy him. I was simply going to force him to look at himself. And I was going to force the company to look too. I packed up my bag exactly at 5 o'clock. I did not stay late. I did not offer to do extra work. I walked out of the building with my head high, knowing that for the first time in months, I was the one controlling the narrative. As I drove home, the mountains silhouetted against the purple evening sky, I felt a strange sense of anticipation. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for him to walk into it, and knowing Graham, his arrogance would lead him right to the center of the X. The air in the office the next morning was so thick with tension, I felt like I was wading through water. Every time I typed on my keyboard, the sound seemed unnaturally loud. My aggressive compliance strategy from the day before had landed. I had forced Graham to acknowledge his own instructions in writing, and he hated it. At 10 in the morning, Graham walked by my desk. He did not stop to chat. He simply tapped the edge of my partition with his knuckles. 2 sharp raps. "Huddle room. Now," he said, not breaking stride. He walked toward one of the small, glass-enclosed breakout rooms near the elevators. These rooms were soundproof, designed for private calls, but in our office, they were known as the execution chambers. It was where people were taken right before they were walked out of the building. I grabbed my notebook. I did not grab my laptop. I wanted my hands free. When I entered, Graham was already sitting, blocking the path to the door. He gestured to the chair opposite him. I sat down, keeping my posture straight, my pen poised over the paper. "Close the notebook, Madeline," he said. His voice was low, lacking the performative boom he used in larger meetings. "I prefer to take notes," I replied, not moving to close it. "This is off the record," he said, leaning forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "This is just two colleagues trying to fix a mess." I looked at him. "I am listening." "You are making this a big deal," he said, shaking his head with a look of disappointed paternalism. "You are sending these emails. You are quoting policy. You are creating an atmosphere of distrust. It is not healthy for the team. I am documenting decisions that affect the budget and the timeline." I said, "That is standard project management. It is hostile," he countered. "And it is making me question whether you have the soft skills for this level of leadership." He let that hang in the air for a second. He was pivoting from my technical competence, which was unassailable, to my soft skills, which were subjective and impossible to measure. "Look," he continued, his tone softening into something that almost sounded like a truce. "I do not want to put you on a performance improvement plan. A PP is messy. It stays on your record. It hurts your chances of transferring internally." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He slid it across the small round table. It was a printed email draft. "I want us to reset," he said. "If you send this email to the team, just a quick note acknowledging that there were some communication breakdowns on your end and that you are committed to aligning with the new operational vision, then the PIP goes away. We scrub the bad review. We start fresh." I looked down at the paper. It was a confession. I apologize for the confusion regarding the project timeline. I realize my communication has been unclear and has caused unnecessary friction. He wanted me to admit to incompetence in writing. If I sent this, he wouldn't scrub the bad review. He would print this email and staple it to the review as proof that I agreed with his assessment. It was a trap wrapped in a promise. I pushed the paper back across the table. "I cannot send that," I said. Graham's eyes hardened. "Why not?" "It is just an email. It clears the air." "Because it is not true," I said, my voice steady, though my pulse was thumping in my throat. I did not cause the friction. The friction was caused by a lack of resources and changing requirements. I will not accept liability for errors I did not make. Graham stared at me for a long time. The mask of the benevolent mentor slipped entirely. What was left was the face of a man who was used to getting his way and was furious that he had hit a wall he could not bully down. "You are making a very expensive mistake," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You think you are protected by your little notes and your timestamps, but you are forgetting how this game works. I pick the team, and right now, you are looking like a bench warmer." "Is that a threat?" I asked. "It is a reality check," he said. He stood up and opened the door. "We are done here." I walked back to my desk, my legs feeling slightly numb. I knew I had just crossed the Rubicon. I had refused the plea deal. Now came the trial. The retaliation began exactly 2 hours later. I was working on the migration schedule when I realized the office was unusually quiet. I looked up. The entire operations leadership team, along with the lead engineers, was filing into the main boardroom. I checked my calendar. I had no meeting scheduled. I stood up and walked over to the admin assistant, a young woman named Chloe who usually managed the invites. "Hey, Chloe," I asked, keeping my voice casual. "Is that the summit strategy sync?" "I think I fell off the invite list." Chloe looked down at her desk, avoiding my eyes. Her face flushed pink. No. I mean, yes, it is the sync, but Graham told me to update the invite list this morning. He said it was for core stakeholders only. I was the project lead. There was no stakeholder more core than me." "I see." I said, "Thanks, Chloe." I went back to my desk. I tried to access the shared folder where the meeting minutes were usually dropped. Access restricted. He wasn't just ignoring me. He was actively cutting me out of the information loop. By the time I got back in, the decisions would be made. The narrative would be set, and I would be left holding the bag for whatever went wrong. I needed coffee. I needed to step away from the glowing screen before I threw something. I walked to the break room. Derek Voss was there, waiting for the Keurig machine to finish brewing. He looked over his shoulder as I walked in, then checked the hallway to make sure we were alone. "I saw you didn't make the meeting," Derek said quietly. "Apparently, I am not a core stakeholder anymore," I replied. Pouring myself a glass of water, Derek stirred his coffee, the spoon clinking softly against the ceramic. "Madeline, you need to know something. I was in a budget meeting with Graham yesterday. He asked me to allocate a salary line for a new senior project manager." My stomach dropped. "A new one to support me." Derek shook his head. "To replace you?" He used the words, "culture fit." He said he needs someone who speaks the same language as the executive team. "Who is it?" I asked. "Did he give a name?" "Yeah," Derek said. "Some guy named Pierce Dalton. Graham said he is a heavy hitter." Pierce Dalton. The name sounded familiar. I thanked Derek and rushed back to my desk. I didn't care who saw me. I pulled up LinkedIn and typed in the name. Pierce Dalton, Senior Program Manager. I scrolled down to his work history. For the last 5 years, Pierce Dalton had been a manager at Apex Logistics. I opened a new tab and searched for Graham's bio. Graham Kessler had been the VP of Operations at Apex Logistics for 4 years before coming to Northbridge. They had worked together. I dug deeper. I found a photo on Pierce's profile from a company retreat 3 years ago. There, standing next to him, holding a beer and laughing, was Graham. This wasn't about performance. This wasn't about culture fit. This was nepotism, pure and simple. Graham was manufacturing a crisis, framing me as incompetent, and manipulating the review system solely to open up a headcount slot for his friend. He was firing me to hire his drinking buddy. I felt a cold clarity wash over me. This was the missing piece. Retaliation was bad, but nepotism combined with fraud. That was a violation of the company's fiduciary duty. If he was hiring friends, he was likely bypassing the standard interview process, which meant he was violating hiring compliance laws too. I looked at the clock. It was 4 in the afternoon. I had spent 2 days playing defense. I had spent 2 days waiting for him to make a move so I could document it. But now I had the full picture. I had the motive. I had the weapon. And I had the body, my own career that he was trying to bury. I opened the "If He Pushes" folder one last time. I created a new subfolder, Final Submission. I wasn't going to wait for him to put me on a PP. I wasn't going to wait for him to fire me. I opened the formal ethics and compliance portal. My hands were steady. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry, and anger, when focused, is a tremendous source of fuel. I began to upload the files. Exhibit A, the threat. Exhibit B, the altered performance review. Exhibit C, the sabotage tickets. Exhibit D, the exclusion from critical business functions. Exhibit E, the link to Pierce Dalton. I typed the cover letter. I didn't use emotional language. I used the language of a prosecutor. I am formally filing a grievance regarding retaliation, hostile work environment, and data tampering against Senior Vice President Graham Kessler. The attached evidence demonstrates a systematic effort to fabricate performance issues in order to terminate my employment for illicit reasons, specifically to facilitate the hiring of a personal associate. I hovered my mouse over the Submit button. Once I clicked this, there was no going back. It was total war. I would be investigated. My name would be dragged through the mud. It might end my career in this city. But then I looked at the empty chair where I should have been sitting in the conference room. I thought about the smirk on Graham's face when he offered me the plea deal. I clicked Submit. The screen flashed green. Case number 49202 has been created. I sat back and exhaled. The bomb was dropped. Now I just had to survive the explosion. Submitting a formal ethics complaint against a senior vice president is not like filing an expense report. It is a deliberate act of corporate arson. You are striking a match, dropping it onto a bridge, and standing there to watch it burn, hoping that the fire does not jump the gap and consume you too. The portal screen on my monitor was stark white with blue text. I had selected the category, Retaliation and Intimidation. Under the subheader, I checked the box for ethical violation and data tampering. I did not write an emotional diatribe in the description box. I wrote an index, attachment, 1 minute from the October 23rd meeting, documenting the explicit threat to employment status. Attachment 2. Email correspondence from October 23rd and 24th, demonstrating a pattern of exclusionary behavior and conflicting instructions. Attachment 3. Access logs from the HR system, specifically highlighting the unauthorized modification of my performance review at 11:47 on a Sunday night. Attachment 4. Comparative screenshots of dashboard access rights, showing the removal of my administrative privileges immediately following the threat. I reviewed the files one last time. The metadata on the performance review edit was my strongest card. Retaliation is often he said, she said, but a timestamp is absolute. A timestamp does not have a motive, it just is. I clicked the final confirmation button. A small green banner appeared at the top of the screen. Thank you. Your report has been received. Case number 49202. It felt anticlimactic. There was no siren, no immediate rush of security guards, just a silent digital handshake. For the next 3 hours, I sat at my desk and worked. I answered emails. I updated the migration tracker. I behaved exactly like the high-performing employee I was, waiting for the system to react. The reaction arrived at 1:15 in the afternoon. It was an email from Human Resources. The subject line was generic, regarding your recent submission. Dear Madeline, we have received your inquiry. We take these matters seriously and would like to discuss the details to better understand the situation. Please come to the HR breakout room at 2 o'clock. It was signed by Kara Sutherland, HR business partner. My stomach tightened. Kara Sutherland was a legend at Northbridge, but not for the reasons you want an HR representative to be legendary. She was known as the fixer, if an executive got a DUI. Kara handled the messaging. If a VP made an inappropriate comment at a holiday party, Kara facilitated the quiet departure. She did not protect the employees. She protected the shield logo on the wall. If my case had been assigned to a junior associate, it would have meant they thought I was a nuisance. The fact that it went straight to Kara meant they knew I was dangerous. I walked into the HR suite at exactly 2 o'clock. The air conditioning was set 5 degrees cooler here than in the rest of the building. The carpet was plush, designed to muffle footsteps and voices. Kara was waiting for me in a small conference room. She was a woman in her late 40s with a smile that was practiced, polished, and completely devoid of warmth. She gestured to a chair. Madeline, she said, her voice dropping an octave into a register of soothing concern. Thank you for coming down. I know this must be a stressful time for you. I am fine. Kara, I said, taking a seat. I placed my hands on the table, clasping them loosely. I assume you have reviewed the files I uploaded. Kara didn't look at her laptop. She looked at me, tilting her head slightly. I did. And I have to say, reading through it, I get the sense that there is a lot of emotion here, a lot of frustration. It was the first move in the chess game. She was trying to reframe a legal complaint as an emotional outburst. There is no emotion in the attachments, I replied, keeping my voice flat. There are timestamps and server logs. Those are facts. Kara sighed, a gentle sound that suggested she was trying to help a confused child. Madeline, let's be real for a second. We know Graham can be intense. He is a driver. He pushes people, sometimes, in the heat of a launch. Things get said. Tone gets misinterpreted. He threatened to fire me in front of 12 witnesses because I presented a risk assessment he did not like. I said, that is not a tonal issue. Is it possible, Kara interjected, leaning forward, that he was expressing concern about the project's velocity, and you internalized it as a personal attack? We see this happen a lot with high-pressure deliveries. No, I said. He specifically used the words, reconsider your position. Then, 12 hours before that meeting, someone used an admin account to alter my performance history to justify that threat. Kara paused. She tapped a pen against her notebook. She had hoped to gloss over the data tampering. We are looking into the technical side, she said, dismissing the felony-level fraud with a wave of her hand. But usually, These things are glitches, or maybe a misunderstanding of how the review cycle works. What I am more concerned about is the relationship breakdown." She smiled again, that shark-like, corporate smile. "Here is what I think we should do," Kara proposed. "I think we should schedule a mediation session. Just you, me, and Graham. We can get in a room, clear the air, and talk about communication expectations. I think if you two just really heard each other, we could put this behind us. It was a trap. A mediation was off the record. It was a way to get me to admit that I might have been difficult or unclear, which would then give them the ammunition to say the conflict was mutual. It would neutralize my retaliation claim because I would have voluntarily agreed to work it out. I am declining mediation," I said. Kara's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Madeline, I strongly suggest you reconsider. We want to resolve this amicably. Retaliation is not a misunderstanding," I said, locking eyes with her. "I am requesting a formal investigation under the company's ethics code. Section 4. I want formal interviews conducted with the witnesses present in the conference room. I want a forensic audit of the HR access logs regarding my performance review. And I want a written confirmation that all data related to my employment and the Summit migration project is being preserved." I saw the shift in her eyes. The kind ant mask vanished. The corporate risk manager appeared. By using the words forensic audit and preservation, I was signaling that I knew the legal landscape. I was signaling that I might sue. "An investigation is a very heavy process," Kara said, her voice losing its soothing quality. "It is disruptive. It involves pulling people away from their work. It creates a record that follows everyone involved." "I know," I said. "That is why I provided the evidence up front, to make it easy for you." Kara closed her notebook. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. She sat back in her chair and looked at me with a cold appraisal. She was calculating the risk. She was weighing the cost of silencing me against the cost of sacrificing Graham. "You have a bright future here, Madeline," she said. "You are a strong project manager, but people who get a reputation for being litigious, they often find that opportunities dry up, not just here, but in the industry. Denver is a small town." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. She wasn't just threatening my job at Northbridge anymore. She was threatening my entire career. She was telling me that if I proceeded, she would make sure I was branded as trouble to every recruiter in the city. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my face remained stone. This was the moment they expected me to fold. This was the moment most people folded because the fear of being blacklisted is primal. But I thought about the modified review. I thought about Pierce Dalton waiting in the wings to take my job. I thought about the years of work I had given to a company that was ready to erase me to cover up a budget error. "Are you telling me," I asked slowly, "that exercising my right to report ethical violations under the employee handbook will negatively impact my career progression? Because that sounds like a secondary act of retaliation." Kara went perfectly still. She realized she had gone too far. She had threatened a whistleblower in a room that might be recorded, or to a person who clearly wrote everything down. "I am simply giving you advice on how to navigate corporate culture," she said, her voice tight. "I am trying to protect you. I don't need protection." "Kara," I said, standing up, "I need an investigation. Please let me know when the interviews begin." I walked to the door. "Madeline," she called out, just as my hand touched the handle. I turned back. "Be very careful," she said. "If you open this box, you cannot close it. We will have to investigate everything, including your performance, including every decision you have made on this project. If we find cause, the outcome might not be what you expect. I welcome the scrutiny." I said, "Does Graham?" I didn't wait for an answer. I walked out of the HR suite and back into the hum of the office. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I had just declared war on the institution itself. I knew Kara would move fast now. She would call legal. She would call Graham. They would circle the wagons, but they were too late. I had already lit the match. The days following my declaration of war in the HR office were defined by a suffocating, manufactured isolation. I had expected a fight. I had expected screaming matches or immediate suspension. Instead, I got silence and a slow, humiliating erosion of my responsibilities. It started with the calendar. On Wednesday morning, I logged in to find that the Summit Migration Planning Series, the daily 2-hour block where the actual work got done, had vanished from my schedule. When I queried the admin, I was told that the meetings had been restructured for technical leads only, in their place. My inbox began to fill with tasks that were insulting for someone with my title. I was assigned to audit the file naming conventions of the shared drive. I was asked to manually update the birthday roster for the department. I was told to reorganize the physical seating chart for the interns coming next summer. I went from managing a multi-million-dollar cloud transition to being a glorified office assistant. It was classic constructive discharge. They were trying to make the job so miserable, so beneath me, that I would quit voluntarily. If I quit, I could not claim unemployment, and my retaliation case would lose its urgency. I did not quit. I updated the birthday roster with the precision of a surgeon. I audited the file names. I sat at my desk, head high, refusing to let them see that I was bleeding internally. Graham, meanwhile, was conducting a masterclass in character assassination. He did not hide it. He normalized it. On Thursday afternoon, I was in the break room getting water. Graham was there with 3 of the junior developers, laughing about the weekend. When I walked in, the laughter stopped abruptly, then restarted with a forced, nervous energy. "Careful, guys," Graham said, his voice loud enough to carry to the hallway. "We need to keep the noise down. We have some people on the team who are feeling a little sensitive lately. We don't want any more drama reports filed." "Do we?" He winked at them. It was a brilliant, cruel maneuver. By acknowledging the tension but framing it as my sensitivity, he undermined my credibility before the investigation even started. He was painting me as the fragile woman who couldn't handle the pressure, while he was the relaxed, joking leader. The developers chuckled awkwardly, looking at their shoes. They were scared of him, and they saw what was happening to me. They learned the lesson: do not cross the boss, or you become the joke. I filled my water bottle and walked out without a word. My hands were shaking so hard, I had to grip the plastic tightly to keep from dropping it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the water in his face. But I knew that was exactly what he wanted. One emotional outburst would prove his point. I went back to my desk and put my headphones on, blocking out the sound of the office that had turned against me. A few minutes later, a shadow fell across my desk. I looked up, expecting Graham coming to deliver another veiled insult. It was Noah Briggs. Noah was a data analyst who had joined the company 8 months ago. He was young, barely 24, with messy hair and hoodies that always seemed a size too big. He was quiet, brilliant with SQL queries, and usually invisible in the social hierarchy of the office. He looked around nervously to make sure no one was watching, then slid a folded piece of paper under my keyboard. I heard what he said in the break room. Noah whispered. I took off my headphones. "It is fine." "Noah, you do not need to get involved. It is not fine," he said, his voice trembling slightly. He did the same thing to Sarah before she went on maternity leave. He made her cry in the stand-up meeting and then told everyone she was hormonal. That is why she took her leave early. My heart skipped a beat. Sarah, my direct manager, the one whose writing style was so different from the fake review Graham had planted. I had assumed she left early for medical reasons. "Noah," I said softly. "Are you sure I sit right outside his office?" Noah said. "The walls are glass, but the vents aren't soundproof. I hear everything." He tapped the paper under my keyboard. "I was working on the server logs you asked for yesterday," he continued, his eyes darting toward Graham's office. "I found something else. I do not know if it helps, but I don't like bullies." He turned and walked away quickly, heading back to his cubicle before anyone could register that we had spoken. I waited a full minute before I pulled the paper out. It wasn't a note. It was a printed screenshot of a Microsoft Teams chat. I unfolded it. The timestamp was from last Friday, 3 days before the meeting where Graham threatened me. The chat was between Graham Kessler and Derek Voss. Graham: "How are we looking on the timeline?" Derek tight. "The latency is real. Madeline is right about the risks. Graham, I do not care about the risks. I care about the board meeting. We need to clear the deck. If she pushes back on Monday, I want her gone. Derek, on what grounds? Her performance is solid. Graham, then make grounds. Start documenting attitude issues. Tell the team she is the bottleneck. If we miss the date, it has to be her fault, not ours. Draft a PP for failure to collaborate, and have it ready. I stared at the paper. The ink seemed to vibrate on the page. This was not just retaliation. This was conspiracy. This was a premeditated plan to scapegoat an employee to cover up executive mismanagement. Graham had explicitly instructed a subordinate to fabricate performance issues, make grounds to protect his own reputation. Derek Voss, the man who had warned me in the break room, the man I thought was a sympathetic bystander, had been complicit. He had pushed back slightly, yes, but he had followed orders. That was why he looked so guilty when we spoke. I felt a wave of nausea, followed immediately by a rush of cold, hard determination. I did not go home. I did not cry. I walked to the scanner in the mailroom. I scanned the document. I saved it as a PDF. I went back to my desk and opened the ethics portal. My case, number 49202, was listed as status pending review. I clicked on Upload Additional Evidence. Description: internal chat log between SVP Graham Kessler and manager Derek Voss, dated Friday, October 20th. Relevance: evidence of premeditated conspiracy to fabricate performance issues and wrongfully terminate employment to cover project delays. I hit submit. I sat back and waited. I knew this was different. The previous evidence was strong, but it was circumstantial. A modified review could be a glitch. A rude comment could be stress, but a text message saying, make grounds, that was smoking gun proof of intent to violate labor laws. My phone rang 20 minutes later. It was Kara Sutherland. I picked up. This is Madeline. Madeline, Kara said. Her voice had changed completely. Gone was the soothing, condescending tone of the corporate aunt. Gone was the veiled threat about my career. Her voice was crisp, urgent, and dangerously sharp. I just received the update to your case file, she said. The chat log. Yes, I said. Where did you get this? She asked. She wasn't asking out of curiosity. She was asking as a risk manager who just realized the building was on fire. It was provided to me by a witness who wishes to remain anonymous for the moment. I replied, but he is willing to testify if the investigation proceeds to a formal hearing. There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear typing. She was likely pulling the raw Teams logs right now to verify the authenticity. Madeline, Kara said, and for the first time, I heard a crack in her armor. Do you have the original file, the digital source? I have access to it. I lied. Noah had given me a printout. But if they subpoenaed the server, the digital record would be there, and I have made copies, both physical and digital, off-site. Okay, Kara said. Okay, listen to me. Do not speak to Derek Voss. Do not speak to Graham. Do not discuss this document with anyone else on the floor. I am escalating this to the chief legal officer immediately. I thought we were doing a mediation, I said, allowing a touch of irony into my voice. There will be no mediation, Kara said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. This changes the scope. We are freezing the review cycle for your department, effective immediately. Thank you. Kara, I said, I will be in touch within the hour, she said, and hung up. I put the phone down. The office around me was still buzzing with the low hum of productivity. Graham was probably still in his office, feeling invincible, perhaps planning his next joke about my sensitivity. He didn't know that the ground had just vanished beneath his feet. I looked at the empty chair next to me where Noah sometimes sat. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting a bad boss. I was pulling a thread that was woven into the entire fabric of the company's culture. Graham felt comfortable doing this because he had done it before. He did it to Sarah. He was doing it to me. He involved Derek. It was a system. And I had just jammed a steel rod into the gears. I took a deep breath. The fear was gone. In its place was a terrifying sense of clarity. I wasn't just going to get my job back, I was going to take the whole house down. The atmosphere on the 12th floor transformed overnight. It no longer felt like a bustling tech office. It felt like a crime scene where the police tape had just been put up. But the body was still warm. The arrival of the investigative team was not subtle. They did not wear uniforms, but they carried an air of detached scrutiny that terrified everyone. Human Resources began the interviews on Friday morning. They commandeered the large conference room at the end of the hall, frosted the glass, and started calling people in one by one. I sat at my desk, watching my colleagues march down that hallway. They looked like students being called to the principal's office. When they returned, they were pale and silent. I tried to catch the eye of a junior developer named Sam, someone I had mentored for 6 months. He looked at the floor and walked quickly past my desk. The fear of contagion was real. Everyone knew that Graham was still the senior vice president. Everyone knew that if the investigation fizzled out, Graham would remain in power, and anyone who had spoken against him would be next on the chopping block. I felt a pang of guilt. I had dragged these people into my war, but then I remembered the text message from Derek Voss, Make Grounds, and my guilt hardened back into resolve. I was not the one who had weaponized the team. Graham was. Around lunchtime, Maya Linton found me. She did not come to my desk. She sent me a signal on Slack, a single period, which was our code to meet in the parking garage, level P4, where there were no cameras near the pillars. I found her leaning against her car, her arms crossed tight against her chest. She looked tired. "They called me in," Maya said, her voice echoing slightly in the concrete cavern. "They asked about the meeting on Monday. They asked if I had ever seen Graham target specific individuals. What did you say?" I asked. "I told them the truth," she said. She looked at me, her eyes dark with a mixture of anger and resignation. "But Madeline, you need to know something. This isn't the first time they have asked me these questions." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Maya took a deep breath. 8 months ago, right after the Alpha launch, I filed a complaint. It was regarding the way Graham spoke to the female QA testers. He was dismissive. He made comments about how they were too emotional to test logic. It was subtle, but it was hostile. I stared at her. "You never told me." "I couldn't," she said. "I filed it through the anonymous portal. HR opened a case. They interviewed me. They interviewed Graham, and then 2 weeks later, I got an email saying the case was closed due to a lack of corroborating evidence. They said it was a he said, she said situation." She paused, kicking at a loose piece of gravel on the floor. "That is why I told you he creates a narrative." She continued. "I learned the hard way, without the paper trail, without the hard data. He just talks his way out of it. He is charming when he needs to be. He convinced them that I was just stressed and misinterpreting his coaching style." My blood ran cold. This was not just an isolated incident of bad management. This was a pattern of institutional failure. The company knew, HR knew, they had let him get away with it 8 months ago. And because he faced no consequences then, he felt emboldened to escalate now. He thought he was untouchable because the system had already proven that it would protect him. "This time is different," I said, my voice fierce. "This time we have the logs." "I hope so," Maya said softly, "because if he survives this, none of us are safe." I went back upstairs with a new understanding of the stakes. This wasn't just about my job. It was about breaking a cycle that had already claimed victims I didn't even know about. By 2 in the afternoon, the investigation shifted gears. I noticed a new group of people entering the HR suite. They were not HR generalists. They wore darker suits, carried distinct, secure laptops, and they did not smile. It was the internal audit and compliance team. Usually, internal audit only gets involved for financial crimes, embezzlement, fraud, bribery. Their presence meant that my allegation of data tampering had triggered a red flag that HR could not sweep under the rug. Modifying a performance review was bad, but unauthorized access to the core HR database was a security breach. At 3 o'clock, my phone rang. It was a man's voice I did not recognize. "Ms. Walsh, this is David Thorne from Internal Audit. I need you to come to the secure meeting room on the 4th floor. Bring your laptop." The fourth floor was legal territory. I took the elevator down. David Thorne was waiting for me. He was a man of zero humor, with glasses that seemed to magnify the intensity of his stare. Kara Sutherland was there too, but she was sitting off to the side, looking significantly less in control than she had 2 days ago. "Ms. Walsh," David began without preamble, "you allege that your performance review was modified at 11:47 at night on Sunday, October 22nd. That is correct." I said, "I provided the screenshot of the modification log. We have verified the log," David said. He turned his laptop screen toward me. It showed a complex string of server access codes. However, we found something disturbing regarding the user identity. He pointed to a line of code. The account used to make the edit was labeled admin exec at assist 04, David explained. This is a floating administrative account. It is not assigned to a specific person in the IT registry. It is a legacy account created 3 years ago to assist with high-level reporting generation. Who has the password, I asked. That is the issue, David said. Technically, it was assigned to the office of the SVP of Operations to allow his support staff to pull aggregate data without needing full HR clearance, but we tracked the IP address of the login from Sunday night. He paused, looking at Kara, then back at me. The login came from a residential IP address in the Cherry Creek neighborhood. He said, "We cross-referenced it with employee files. It matches the home internet service of Elena Rosales." Elena Rosales, Graham's executive assistant. "Elena modified my review," I asked, confused. Elena was nice. We had shared lunch. She had no reason to sabotage me. "We interviewed Ms. Rosales 20 minutes ago," David said, his voice flat. "She admitted that she was instructed to share the login credentials for that account with Mr. Kessler 6 months ago. She stated that Mr. Kessler told her he needed it to fix formatting errors on his direct reports files during the weekend." The room went silent. The picture was complete. Graham didn't just ask someone to change the review. He bullied his assistant into giving him a backdoor key to the system, a violation of every security protocol in the book, and then he logged in from his own home, or perhaps hers, to plant the evidence himself. He had bypassed HR entirely because he knew they wouldn't approve the change. "So," I said, keeping my voice steady, "the senior vice president of operations is personally using a compromised admin account to falsify personnel records from his living room." David Thorne closed his laptop. "That appears to be the fact pattern. This is no longer just an HR issue, Ms. Walsh. This is a violation of the Sarbanes-Oxley controls regarding data integrity. If he can change a review, he can change financial approval logs. He can change compliance dates." Kara looked pale. She knew what this meant. Graham wasn't just a liability. He was a radioactive crater. I returned to my desk, my heart pounding with a strange mixture of vindication and adrenaline. The machine was turning. Graham must have sensed the shift. He must have received a call. Or perhaps he just noticed that Elena was crying in the break room. At 4:15, my phone buzzed. A text from Graham. "Madeline, are you around? I think things have gotten a little out of hand. I want to buy you a coffee. Let's go downstairs and talk this through. Just us. No notes. I think we can find a middle ground that makes everyone happy." It was the classic abuser's pivot. When the stick fails, use the carrot. When intimidation fails, use charm. He was scared. He wanted to get me in a room, off the record, and charm me into retracting the complaint. He probably thought he could offer me a promotion, or a raise, or a transfer, anything to stop the audit. I looked at the phone. I felt a surge of disgust. He really thought I was that cheap. He thought my integrity was for sale for the price of a latte and a fake apology. I did not reply. 10 minutes later, another text. "Come on, Madeline. We have a long history. Don't let the lawyers blow this up. It will be bad for the whole team. Just talk to me." I took a screenshot of the texts. I emailed them to David Thorne and Kara Sutherland. Subject: unsolicited contact from subject of investigation. Body: please see the attached attempts by Graham Kessler to initiate off-the-record contact regarding the ongoing case. I am not responding. I saw Graham come out of his office. He looked around the floor. scanning the cubicles. His tie was loosened. His hair was slightly disheveled. He looked at me. I met his gaze and held it. I did not smile. I did not blink. I just looked at him with the blank, professional indifference of a stranger. He stopped. He realized, finally, that he had absolutely no power over me anymore. He turned around and went back into his glass cage. At 4:55, a calendar notification popped up on my screen. It was priority red. Subject executive review. Attendance mandatory time. 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Location boardroom A. I clicked to expand the invite list. It was a who's who of the company's heavy hitters. Madeline Walsh, Graham Kessler, Kara Sutherland, HR, David Thorne, Audit, Marcus Ginn, VP of Engineering, Sarah Jenkins, Chief Legal Officer, Robert Vance, Chief Operating Officer. The COO was coming. This was it. They weren't just investigating anymore. They were convening a tribunal. Graham wasn't being called in to explain himself. He was being called in to face the music. I packed my bag slowly. The office felt different now. The silence wasn't oppressive. It was expectant. I looked at the "if he pushes" folder on my desktop one last time. I didn't need to add anything else to it. It had done its job. I walked out of the building into the cool Denver evening. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. I took a deep breath of the fresh air. Tomorrow, I would walk into that boardroom, and I wouldn't be the victim. I would be the prosecutor. And Graham Kessler was about to learn that in the corporate world, the person with the best paper trail is the one who holds the knife. The boardroom on the top floor was designed to intimidate. It was a vast space of chrome and glass, dominated by a table long enough to land a small aircraft on. Usually, the view of the Rocky Mountains from here was breathtaking, but today the blinds were drawn, reducing the world to the artificial hum of the climate control system. I sat on the left side of the table. My laptop was closed. Beside me sat a thick binder, organized with color-coded tabs. Across from me sat Graham Kessler. He looked impeccable. He was wearing his charcoal power suit, his hair perfectly coiffed, his posture relaxed. He smiled at the Chief Operating Officer, Robert Vance, who sat at the head of the table. He nodded at Sarah Jenkins, the Chief Legal Officer, who sat like a statue to Robert's right. To Graham, this was just another meeting to finesse. He believed in his bones that he was essential and I was expendable. David Thorne from Audit and Kara Sutherland from HR sat in the middle, acting as the bridge between the accuser and the accused. "Let us begin," Robert Vance said. His voice was gravelly and devoid of warmth. "We are here to address formal complaints filed under case number 49202 regarding allegations of retaliation, data tampering, and hostile work environment. Graham, we will give you the floor first." Graham cleared his throat. He leaned forward, clasping his hands on the table, a gesture designed to show openness and sincerity. "Thank you, Robert," Graham said, his voice smooth, modulating perfectly to sound reasonable and magnanimous. "First, I want to say that Madeline is a talented employee. She has been a strong contributor in the past. However, what we are seeing here is unfortunately a classic case of burnout manifesting as defensiveness." He looked around the room, making eye contact with everyone except me. "The summit migration is a high-pressure environment," he continued. "I admit, I have high standards. I push my team. Last Monday, I had to give Madeline some tough feedback regarding her communication style and her negativity toward the timeline. It seems she took that professional critique very personally. This entire complaint, the logs, the emails, it is just a reaction to being held accountable. It is a communication breakdown, nothing more." He sat back, spreading his hands. "I am happy to work with Madeline to fix these soft skill gaps, but I do not think this rises to the level of an ethics violation. It was a good performance. If I hadn't come prepared, it might have worked." He framed the narrative perfectly. He was the tough but fair leader, and I was the emotional, overwhelmed subordinate. Robert Vance turned his gaze to me. "Madeline, I did not smile. I did not raise my voice. I opened my binder. This is not about communication styles. I said, This is about a sequence of verifiable facts. I flipped to the first tab. Fact 1, I said. On Monday morning, I presented a risk assessment based on mathematical models showing a 20% failure rate. I did not offer opinions. I offered data. In response, Graham did not critique my work. He threatened my employment. Graham chuckled softly, shaking his head. Madeline, come on. I said we needed to rethink your fit if you couldn't get on board. That is standard management coaching. We will get to the phrasing in a moment, I said, cutting him off with a sharp look. Fact 2. Immediately following that meeting, my administrative access to the project dashboards was revoked. Fact 3. On Tuesday, I was removed from the calendar invites for the very project I lead. Fact 4. On Wednesday, I was assigned clerical work well below my pay grade. I slid a piece of paper across the table toward the legal officer. These are the email chains where I attempted to clarify these changes. I said, Graham refused to answer in writing, insisting on verbal instructions only. When I recapped our conversations via email to create a record, he accused me of being hostile. Sarah Jenkins picked up the paper, reading it silently. Her face gave nothing away. Kara Sutherland spoke up. She looked tense, her eyes darting between Graham and her notebook. We need to address the core allegation regarding the meeting on Monday. Graham, for the record, did you at any point explicitly threaten to terminate Madeline's employment during that session? Graham sighed, looking like a man whose patience was being tested by children. No, absolutely not. I told her I would have to review her role if she continued to obstruct the team. That is not a threat. That is performance management. And frankly, it is my word against hers. Actually, I said, it is not. I looked at the door. I would like to call Noah Briggs. Graham's head snapped toward me. For the first time, the smile slipped. He didn't know Noah was involved. The door opened, and Noah walked in. He looked terrified. He was wearing a dress shirt that was slightly too large for him, and he was clutching his hands together to stop them from shaking. But he walked to the empty chair at the end of the table and sat down. Mr. Briggs, Sarah Jenkins said, you were present in the conference room on Monday morning. Yes, ma'am, Noah said, his voice quiet. Did you hear Mr. Kessler speak to Ms. Walsh regarding her position? Noah took a deep breath. He looked at Graham, then quickly looked away. Yes, he interrupted her presentation. He said, and I quote, if you continue to slow this down, I will be forced to reconsider your position at Northbridge. And how did you interpret that? Sarah asked. I thought he was going to fire her right there. Noah said, It was scary. I wrote it down in my notebook immediately because I thought I might need to protect myself if he turned on me next. Graham's face flushed a deep, angry red. This is ridiculous. The kid is a junior analyst. He barely knows what is going on. Madeline probably put him up to this. Mr. Briggs has provided his original handwritten notes from the meeting, time-stamped by his digital notebook app. Kara interjected. They match Madeline's account verbatim. Graham opened his mouth to argue, but David Thorne from Audit leaned forward. We can debate the semantics of the meeting all day, David said, his voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. But the audit team is less interested in what was said, and more interested in what was done to the system. David connected his laptop to the main projector. A spreadsheet appeared on the wall screen. It was a dense log of server activity. Mr. Kessler, David said, you stated in your initial response to HR that Madeline's performance has been an issue for months. Is that correct? Yes, Graham said, crossing his arms. She has been rigid, difficult. Then why? David asked, pointing to the screen. Did her performance review show a rating of exceeds expectations as of last Friday afternoon? Graham blinked. I don't recall the specific rating. I have a lot of reports. Let me refresh your memory, David said. He clicked a button. The screen changed to show the modification log. At 11:47 at night on Sunday, the night before the meeting in question, an unauthorized edit was made to Madeline's file. A paragraph detailing insubordination was added retroactively. The room was deadly silent. Robert Vance, the COO, was staring at the screen with laser focus. The edit, David continued, was made using an administrative account assigned to your executive assistant, Elena Rosales. When we interviewed Ms. Rosales, she confirmed that you demanded her login credentials 3 months ago. Graham shifted in his seat. He was sweating now. I could see a sheen of perspiration on his forehead. Elena is confused, Graham said, his voice tighter, higher. I might have asked for help pulling a report once. I certainly didn't log in at midnight to edit a review. That is absurd. Maybe she made the mistake. You know how assistants are. We traced the IP address, David said. He delivered the line with the finality of a guillotine blade dropping. The login did not come from the office. It did not come from Elena's home. It came from the residential IP address registered to your house in Cherry Creek. Graham froze. There was no spinning this. There was no communication gap. Science had just walked into the room and pointed a finger directly at his chest. You logged in from your living room, David said. Reading from the report. You bypassed the HR approval chain. You falsified a personnel record to create a pretext for termination before the alleged incident even occurred. That is a violation of the Data Integrity Act and grounds for immediate dismissal under our corporate charter. Graham looked at the COO. Robert, look, I was trying to clean up the files. The system is clunky. I was just trying to make sure the documentation matched reality. You know how important this launch is? I was doing what needed to be done to protect the company from a bad project manager. Robert Vance did not blink. He looked at Graham with cold disgust. You falsified records to frame an employee. Graham, then Sarah Jenkins, the chief legal officer, spoke again. She had been reading the chat log I had submitted, the one Noah had given me. It gets worse, she said. She placed the paper on the table and looked Graham dead in the eye. We have a chat log here between you and Derek Voss, she said. In this log, you explicitly instruct Mr. Voss to, quote, make grounds for a performance improvement plan because you wanted Madeline gone if she pushed back on the timeline. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Graham, she asked, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. Did you direct a subordinate to fabricate performance issues to justify a termination before a valid review process had even begun? Graham slammed his hand on the table. The noise made everyone jump except me. This is a witch hunt, he shouted. Standing up, the mask was gone. The polished executive had vanished, replaced by a desperate, cornered bully. I am the reason this department makes money. I am the one delivering the summit migration. You are going to take the word of a disgruntled manager and a junior kid over mine. I was managing my team. I was doing what I had to do to get the job done. You were breaking the law, Sarah said. She didn't flinch. Constructive discharge, retaliation, fraud, conspiracy. I bring in the revenue, Graham yelled, pointing a finger at Robert. You fire me, and the stock takes a hit. You know it. You need me. I watched him unravel. It was pathetic. He wasn't a leader. He was just a man who had gotten used to making his own rules. And now that the rule book was being thrown at him, he couldn't handle the weight. Robert Vance stood up slowly. He was a tall man, imposing. Sit down, Graham, Robert said. I will not sit down. Graham collapsed back into his chair, breathing heavily. He looked around the room, searching for an ally, but finding only cold, hard stares. Graham Kessler, Sarah Jenkins said, looking down at her notes. In light of the overwhelming evidence regarding data tampering, witness intimidation, and premeditated retaliation, we are moving past the investigation phase. She looked at the HR business partner. Kara, please read the determination. Kara cleared her throat. She looked at Graham with a mixture of pity and professional detachment. Graham, she said, effective immediately. You are placed on unpaid administrative leave pending the finalization of your separation agreement. You are to surrender your badge and your laptop right now. Security is waiting outside to escort you from the building. Graham looked at me. His eyes were wide, filled with shock and hatred. He couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe that the woman he had threatened on Monday was watching him lose everything on Friday. I looked back at him. I didn't smirk. I didn't say, I told you so. I just closed my binder. The sound of the snap echoed in the silent room like a gunshot. I think we are done here, I said quietly. The silence that followed my statement was heavy, but it did not last. Graham Kessler was not a man who accepted defeat, even when the evidence was projected on a 20-foot screen behind him. He looked at the security guard standing by the door, then back at the chief operating officer, his face twisting into a mask of desperate indignation. "You cannot be serious," Graham spat, pointing a shaking finger across the table at me. "You are going to suspend me for what? For managing a crisis. You are letting her destroy the team's morale." He stood up, ignoring Robert's command to sit. "Do you have any idea what this investigation has done to the velocity of the summit migration?" Graham shouted, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "She orchestrated this. She filed this case specifically to stall the project, so she would have an excuse for missing her deadlines. She is not a whistleblower, Robert. She is a saboteur. She is willing to burn down the entire department just to save her own skin." It was a vicious accusation. In the corporate world, being called a saboteur is worse than being called incompetent. He was trying to pivot the narrative one last time, to paint my legal protection as an act of professional terrorism. I started to speak, but Sarah Jenkins, the chief legal officer, raised her hand. She did not look at Graham. She looked at her notes. "Mr. Kessler," Sarah said, her voice cutting through his shouting with the precision of a razor blade. "Please stop talking. You are digging a deeper hole." She looked up, removing her glasses. "You are attempting to frame a protected legal process as an act of sabotage," she continued coldly. "That accusation, in itself, is a form of retaliation. But let us be very clear about the hierarchy of offenses here. We are not discussing interpersonal conflict. We are not discussing project delays. We are discussing the unauthorized manipulation of federal employment records and the violation of the Data Integrity Act." She leaned forward. "When you accessed the HR database from your personal residence and altered a performance review, you exposed this company to liability that far exceeds the value of any single project." She said, "This is no longer a management dispute. This is a compliance failure of the highest order. Your opinion on Madeline's motivation is irrelevant because the forensic evidence of your actions is undeniable." Graham opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The legal reality had finally pierced his ego. He wasn't fighting a subordinate anymore. He was fighting the corporation's survival instinct. Robert Vance, the chief operating officer, cleared his throat. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had just realized that his star quarterback had been betting against his own team. "Graham," Robert said, "the decision regarding your employment status has been made. However, simply firing you would perhaps be too easy. It would allow you to leave here today, spin a story about strategic differences, and land another VP role next week." Robert paused. He looked at the audit director. "David Thorne, we are not going to fire you," Robert said. Graham blinked, a flicker of hope sparking in his eyes. "Robert, thank you. I knew you would see reason. I can fix this. I can—" "You are not listening," Robert interrupted, his voice dropping to a low, steel tone. "We are not firing you because we need you available for the external audit that is about to begin. Instead, effective immediately, you are stripped of your title as Senior Vice President." The color drained from Graham's face. "You are being demoted," Robert continued, delivering the sentence with brutal clarity. "You are being reclassified as an individual contributor. Your direct reports are reassigned. Your budget authority is revoked. You will be moved to a non-leadership role in the Legacy Archive Division, where you will assist the audit team in untangling the financial discrepancies we have found in your department. You will have no team, you will have no office, and you will be under strict supervision until the investigation concludes." It was a fate worse than termination, for a man like Graham, whose entire identity was built on power and status. Being stripped of his title and forced to work as a grunt in the archives was a public humiliation. He wasn't just losing his job, he was losing his kingdom. Graham slumped into his chair. He looked small. The swagger was gone. The expensive suit suddenly looked like a costume. Robert turned to me. His expression softened, but only slightly. "Madeline," he said, "on behalf of the leadership team, I apologize that it came to this. The company failed to protect you from a hostile environment." He clasped his hands. "We want to make this right." Robert said, "What is your desired resolution? Do you want a severance package? Do you want to leave?" I looked at Graham, who was staring blankly at the table. I could have asked for him to be fired on the spot. I could have asked for a massive settlement, but I didn't want to run away. I had done nothing wrong. "I do not want to leave." I said firmly, "I like my job. I am good at it, and I want to finish the summit migration because my team deserves a win." I opened my notebook to a fresh page. "I have 3 requests." I said, "Name them." Robert said, "First," I said, "I want my administrative access to the project dashboards restored immediately, and I want a forensic cleanse of my HR file. The fraudulent note from Sunday night must be permanently expunged, and my original exceeds expectations rating must be locked." "Done," Kara Sutherland said from the side. "It is already processing the ticket." "Second," I continued, "I can no longer report to the operations vertical. The trust is broken. I am requesting a transfer of my reporting line to Marcus Ginn in engineering. I will still manage the operations projects, but my performance will be evaluated by engineering leadership." Robert nodded. "That is a wise structure." "Marcus, do you agree?" Marcus Ginn, who had been silent throughout the meeting, nodded gravely. "I would be honored to have Madeline on my roster. She is the only reason the servers are still running." "And third," I said. I paused, looking directly at Graham. "I want a full audit of all performance reviews and termination cases initiated by Graham Kessler over the last 24 months. I am not the only one. There are others who were pushed out, others whose careers were damaged. They deserve to have their records corrected too." Graham flinched. This was the final nail. I wasn't just saving myself. I was burning down his legacy of corruption. Robert looked at me with a newfound respect. "That is a significant request. Madeline, it opens the company up to potential liability from past employees. The liability already exists," I countered. "Addressing it proactively is the only way to mitigate it. It is the right thing to do." Robert held my gaze for a long moment. Then, he nodded. "Agreed," he said. "We will initiate a retroactive review of the department's personnel files starting Monday." He stood up. "Graham," Robert said, his voice cold, "hand your badge and your laptop to security. They will escort you to your vehicle. You can collect your personal effects from your office over the weekend, under supervision." Graham stood up slowly. He looked like a ghost. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his access badge, the symbol of his authority, and slid it across the glass table. It made a harsh scratching sound. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. He turned and walked toward the door. Flanked by 2 security guards, the man who had threatened to ruin me was now being walked out like a petty thief. I gathered my binder. I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me, but beneath it was a profound sense of peace. "Thank you." "Robert," I said. "No," Robert replied. "Thank you. Madeline, you saved us from a much bigger disaster." I left the boardroom 5 minutes later. To get to the elevators, I had to pass the executive wing. I walked down the long hallway. The office was buzzing with the low-level energy of a Friday morning, most people unaware of the execution that had just taken place upstairs. I passed Graham's office. It was a corner suite, encased in glass. He was inside, packing a box. His jacket was off. He was placing a framed photo into a cardboard container. He looked up as I walked by. For a second, our eyes met through the glass. There was no smirk this time. There was no arrogance. There was only the hollow look of a man who realized too late that he was not the king of the world. He was just a middle manager who had underestimated the quiet woman in the corner. I didn't stop. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I didn't need to say a word. The glass wall between us said everything. He was on the inside, trapped in the wreckage of his own ego. I was on the outside, free, with my integrity intact and my head held high. I walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and waited. When the doors opened, I stepped in and watched the 12th floor disappear. I had walked into that building a victim, and I was walking out a survivor. The system is designed to protect the powerful, but it is built on rules, and if you know the rules better than they do, if you keep your receipts and refuse to blink, sometimes, just sometimes, you can make the system work for you. Graham Kessler lost his title today, but I think, in the end, he lost something much more valuable. He lost the illusion that he was untouchable, and I found out exactly how strong I really am. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It was a long journey from that terrifying meeting to the final victory, and I truly appreciate you sticking with me through every twist and turn. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening on your commute, at your desk, or maybe while winding down at home? Please drop a comment below and let me know. It is always amazing to connect with listeners from all over the world. If you enjoyed seeing a toxic boss get exactly what he deserved, please make sure to subscribe to the Boss Revenge Stories channel so you never miss a new episode. Hit that like button if you think Graham got what was coming to him, and please smash that hype button to help this story reach more people who might need a little inspiration to stand up for themselves. Stay strong, keep your receipts, and I will see you in the next story.